Hi, you are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us. Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Now, in the past 3 months, most of us have faced previously unimaginable adversity. At the time of this taping, more than 58,000 Americans have succumbed to coronavirus deaths. Millions more mourn the losses of friends and family members. We all have experienced levels of unemployment unseen since the Great Depression and financial stressors, which have exacerbated relationship problems, anxiety, and depression, as well as, for many of us, the more basic needs of paying for rent, housing, mortgages, food, car payments, medical care, etc. Stay-at-home orders have created problems with confinement, childcare, homeschooling, and exacerbated or contributed to domestic violence and child abuse. What are your stressors, and how do you overcome them? You know, there's an old saying that adversity builds character, but character is just not enough sometimes to overcome the level of adversity, trauma, change, and uncertainty many of us are experiencing. And what we long for are concrete, specific strategies. I know I often feel like I just sometimes want someone to tell me what to do. And so, as if anticipating this crisis, our guest today, author Nina Sossamon-Pogue, has put it all in writing for us in her new book, This Is Not the End: Strategies to Get You Through the Worst Chapters of Your Life. Now, Nina knows firsthand about the plot-twisting impact of life-changing events, and I'm going to let her tell us about them. But spoiler alert, she has a wealth of experiences behind her, both good and horrible. She's been a member of the same United States Gymnastics Team that Lou Retton was on. She's been a successful corporate executive, an investigative reporter, and she has something Donald Trump has coveted for many years, which is an Emmy Award. She's an Emmy Award-winning news anchor and was voted Charleston's favorite news anchor for 10 consecutive years. She's also the married mom of 3 college-age children. But she has also flown through the eye of Hurricane Andrew, covered the 9/11 World Trade Center attacks, experienced life-altering injury, been downsized from a beloved job, gone through divorce, and been a single mom. And most transformatively and tragically, she was the driver in a devastating accident in her co-anchor's driveway that crushed the skull of her friend's baby boy. This led to despair and suicidal thoughts, but it also led to a miraculous full recovery for both the baby and herself. Welcome to the ladies' room, Nina Sossamon-Pogue.
I am so honored to be here in the ladies' room with you. And wow, what an intro that was. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. We specialize in intros here.
It was impressive.
And what we want to do is to introduce our guests to really fascinating people. We love hearing everybody's stories of ordinary women doing extraordinary things and extraordinary women doing ordinary things. And sounds like you are what we would call all of the above.
I've certainly had a storied life. I've had a lot of highs, very high highs, and I've had a lot of very low lows. And thus, that's where the book came from. You know, it's not all Facebook and Instagram. And there's a lot of ugliness and hardship behind most people who are successful. And I wanted to be able to share that to encourage other people who are going through really difficult times when they were defined by something in their life and all of a sudden their life went in a completely different direction. Not through any fault of their own or maybe through fault of their own, but it was not part of the plan. And so the book is about what do you do when it's not part of the plan. And I wrote the book that, I now look back, it was the book that I needed during that time. I read a lot, like big PTSD journals and religion and Stoic philosophy and cognitive behavioral therapy, like you name it. I don't use any of those words in this book. This is just a quick, like a cliff notes, just get me through this chapter that I don't want to be in. That's what this book is.
So, interestingly, I mentioned in the intro that you were almost like having a premonition that we were going to need a book like this. Obviously, if the book is out now, you had to have written this long before the coronavirus crisis that we're facing, a worldwide pandemic. So what led to your writing the book, aside from what you say, which a lot of our authors say, is that they wrote the book for me because I needed this. But what led to your writing it?
Well, I just became this go-to person because I'd gone through so many things, and I was very public. So I was being on the U.S. team, you're very public. As a news anchor, I was very public. As a leader of my company, so I was very public life to begin with. And what I found was, the older I got, people kept coming to me and saying, how'd you do that? How do you reinvent yourself? I mean, grown men in their 40s would knock on my door with a cup of coffee and say, I just got let go. You know me, my wife and kids, like, well, help. What do I do? How do I reinvent myself? Or people and would schedule a sync on my calendar, a little 30-minute sync. I'm like, I don't even know who this is. But now I'm at my job with a sync. And it was usually someone who was going through something really difficult who said, I hear that you just got some good advice. And then my kids got old enough to go off to college, and I
give you some free time.
I know they're gonna have stuff happen, and I wanted to be able to put it into words. So I didn't know what it was that I was helping. I knew I was helping, but I didn't have it organized. I didn't have my thoughts organized, and I really wanted to be able to help in a more meaningful way than just one-on-one. So I spent some time to really listen to myself and figure out what stories I was telling, what books I'd read, what is all of that I know, and put that into something I could hand to someone or put out there for other people, more than just the few people who could knock on my door or come sit. I always say, sit on the end of my dock, and I will work you through anything.
Yeah, I was kind of joking when I said that I specialize in intros. And usually when I write the intros for our guests, not always, but usually I'm only talking about the wonderful accolades in their resume, because usually the yucky parts and the not so pleasant parts and the tragedies are not part of the story. We did talk to a woman who wrote a book called V is for Victory, about how she overcame the devastation of losing her leg after going in for just completely routine fibroid surgery.
Wow.
And, of course, the saying, people plan and God laughs. And she used this experience to become a Paralympic athlete. Not having been an Olympian before, but having been a college athlete before. But most of the people that we talk to, we don't talk about the bad parts of their story. And I noticed when I was reading your professional bio, I could have written this introduction two very different ways. I could have, if you were talking about your experiences, as a rheumatologist treating arthritis, I would have written the bio just focusing on all of your accolades and all of your previous jobs and your previous appointments. But this time, the tragedies and the downsides and the difficulties and the disappointments were all part of the story. And I started thinking about, this thing that I saw you say in another interview about how we write our own scripts. And we write, we tell the story differently depending on the audience. So tell us about that and this theme of writing your own script that kind of, motivates the book and sort of permeates the book.
Yeah, so I set the tone with that in the book. The book is really all about you, not me. My story is peppered throughout, but I really put it, here's what you're going through. Let me get you there. And I even say, if you're having really dark, scary thoughts, just jump to chapter 8 and I'll get you there. But I do lay it out as a book, and I do tell you're writing the story of your life. And the best way to think about this, I really like it. And for the current situation that we're in right now, it really makes sense too. And I think for many people, it relieves a little anxiety just to think along these terms. Mm-hmm. So we are all writing our own stories. The book's called This Is Not the End. And on the front, there's a typewriter with the words the end, like someone just ended. So we're writing our stories, each one of us. You are, and I am. And right now we're having this cool moment because, we're in each other's stories. Mm-hmm. But think about the book of your life. How big is it? How thick is it? Is it a hardback or a softback? Is it a children's story? Is it a really huge novel you can picture on the shelf? What does that book look like? What's the cover look like? And then open it to today. We're all on a page in our book right now. Like, this is a page in a book, and we're on each other's pages now. Maybe we're making each other's books. But when you open it up, everything you've done has brought you to this point, and who you are and your experiences and all. And then everything going forward, all those pages going forward are blank. There's nothing there. You decide the language. What you say in your head comes out of your mouth, and it comes back to you as your story. So I talk about that. Like, are you stuck at home right now, or are you safe at home right now? What's the language that you're using as we're writing this chapter in our story? And with all those pages ahead blank, you will have more chapters. This is just one chapter. This is not your whole book. When you're in the middle of something like what we're all in the middle of right now, we've been home for a long time and we're frustrated and we're losing jobs and we're losing friends and our friends are losing jobs and friends. I mean, there's no one that's not touched by it. We all are kind of frightened and anxious and going through the process in our own right. But all the pages ahead are blank for everyone, and we won't feel like this forever. And so you are writing that story. You still have many more chapters. This is just one really crappy chapter that we're all in the middle of. You know, we're all having this crappy chapter. What's really cool is 5 years from now, you and I could go out for a glass of wine, and I hope we do. And we go out for a glass of wine, and then the story, the conversation for all of us will turn to, where were you when? Kind of like we have the 9/11 stories now.
Absolutely.
Like, everybody knows where they were when that happened. And so that's very much a connecting story when you're having a pizza or a beer with somebody.
And there's many other stories like that, and shared experiences that we have as a culture. You know,
Right.
Where were you when the amazing Mets won the World Series? You know, they're not all bad. Where were you during the earthquake in San Francisco? Where were you when you found out JFK died, if you're my age or older? You know, where were you, on the last episode of MASH? we like those shared experiences.
Right. And unlike many of the ones that we have as Americans, many of the ones you mentioned are American stories. This is now global. There'll be no place you can go in the world where someone's not going to have a shared, where were you in the pandemic of 2020? Even those little countries we don't even know how to pronounce their names. Everybody's having this shared experience all over the globe. So we will have that story. And so, yes, there will be 5 years from now, and you will be sitting with friends back again, sitting around having wine with your friends again, and you will have a story to tell. It is going to be there. It's not always going to feel like this. But the you 5 years from now is looking to the you right now to create a story or to do something during this time that you're proud of. Did you stay home and stay safe? Did you help others? Did you call people? What is the story you're creating right now in the middle of this?
I actually tweeted that a few days ago,
Yeah.
that not all of our experiences right now are all bad.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of really negative things that we're all dealing with. And, number one is fear. And fear of the unknown is always, the worst fear. And this sense that we don't have any control. But many people, one of our guests a few episodes ago was Dorothy, the organizer. And she talked about how many people are using this time to organize their closets and clean up their houses and fill up boxes of clothes for charity. And many of us are focusing on better eating habits or sleep habits or other health habits we need to improve. Our next episode is going to be with a top Beverly Hills dermatologist about how, yes, stress is really bad for your skin, but many other things like not wearing makeup for 6 weeks is actually good for your skin.
Right.
But one of my favorite movies that I never remember the exact title about. Did you ever see that movie, The Best, Most Wonderful Marigold Hotel?
Yes.
I love that. I don't know if I have the title right, but the main character repeatedly says, it all works out in the end. And if it's not worked out yet, it's not the end.
That's exactly what we're all in right now. So we're all working out this chapter. And then in the next chapter, this will be a story that we tell. And we're having this experience right now. I heard this term recently, and I've kind of stolen it. And I really like the way it works in this situation. It's collective grief. So we're all going through grief, and grief is not linear. There's a lot of pieces to it. But as a society, we all have this collective grief. So we have the denial piece of grief. Not me. This isn't happening. It's not going to affect me. And then the anger piece. You're taking away my sports. You're making me stay home. And then there's that bargaining. Oh, if I just stay home for 2 weeks. Remember when we all said that? If we just stay home for 2 weeks, then we'll be able to go do everything again. That whole bargaining thing we did. And then sadness. this is taking a long time. I'm losing people. I'm losing my job. I'm dipping into my savings. Like there's a sadness there. And then you get to that piece of grief, which is acceptance. And as you can imagine, acceptance is where the power lies. So once we get to this acceptance piece and go, okay, this is where we are, that's like, it doesn't end until it ends. Like you said, this is it. We're all in this and we're in it together. There's no one not touched by this. Then when you hit the acceptance, then you can that gives you some power. That empowers you to go, okay, I can stay home. I can wash my hands. I can do better skincare or organize my closets. There's a lot of things I can do. I have not done any of those. But I've started my second book. That's what I've started working on.
I didn't do any of those for the first couple of weeks. The first couple of weeks, I was just kind of in a frenzy. But in the last couple of weeks, I've started saying, okay, how can I make the best of this? And how can, and I also live in New Jersey, which has been pretty hard hit, and was also dealing with a sick child at the beginning. Which was very difficult and very scary, and all worked out well now, fortunately, but have lost lots of friends and colleagues in the process. Certainly healthcare workers are the most heavily hit. I do want to address something you said a few minutes ago about people being in people who might be in a particularly dark, scary place. Neither you nor I, as a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so the public service announcement is that if you are in a dark, scary place, please do reach out for professional help, which is always a really good thing if you need it. And of course, even though lots of therapists are not seeing patients in person now, telemedicine has been a really remarkable development during this time. And it's something lots of us have advocated for in the past, but it took a crisis of this magnitude for us to say, we don't always have to see patients in person. We can do this virtually as well. So now let's turn to you as a person. And, in your story, you've written this great book that I think can really help a lot of people. But first, tell us how you are doing in light of this crisis. Certainly you've had a great thing happen, which is the launch of your new book. But I guess some of your hopes and expectations were a little dampened because I guess you anticipated a book tour, which is now virtual.
Yes, just like everyone else, I'm adjusting and making changes as I need to. I speak on resilience, and I'll do two parts to this. I'm doing okay, and I'm making changes like everybody else is. So I'm not doing the book tours. I'm not standing in a Barnes and Noble and signing books, which I thought would be a neat thing for my first book. The book wasn't supposed to come out till August. We actually pushed up the date because we felt like it could help right now. And we made the ebook is 99 cents. We put it out there so everybody can grab it. So right now, through this next month, we're going to keep it at 99 cents. So if you need it, you can just download it on your Kindle or your Nook or your Apple Reader or whatever you have.
And where can people get that?
You can get it online and anywhere where you get books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
So they don't have to go to your website to get that.
No. The book is at Barnes and Noble and Books A Million and Indigo, and it's on Amazon, and it's on your e-readers and your Kindles. It's all wherever you usually buy books. It's there. We just put it out everywhere and then made it as free as we could make it, so you could get your hands on it. Yeah. So we made that change, and for me, I am resilient. I talk about resilience. That's my expertise is on what it means to be resilient. And I think that's one of the key things that's really interesting during this, and where I feel like I wrote the book a year ago, and now it's so perfect for this situation. Who'd have known? But when you think about the word resilience, you hear some people are like, oh, there's books on grit and determination, and you don't hear people using that language right now in the news or anywhere else. You're hearing this word resilience a lot. And the reason is like those grit and determination people, they're probably struggling the most right now, because you can't just go harder and do what you've been doing and do it more, because you can't do what you've been doing. Everybody has had to make a change. The word resilience is the definition of it from the Center for Resilience is to adapt and grow stronger, to learn and adjust in a positive way. Like those pieces of the definition of resilience, none of us can keep doing what we've been doing. No one got up on January 1st and said, okay, my goals for this year are to survive a pandemic. That's not what we were doing. We all had goals and we had plans, and this was not part of anyone's plans. I mean, my son is not going to his college graduation, and he's been studying for the MCAT for a year and a half, and that date's now no longer the date. So, I mean, everybody has their own story of what they're dealing with and how resilient they're being. This resilience piece is to adapt and grow stronger. We're all going to adapt and survive. I have my own days where I get up when I'm ready to go.
We're all going, I have to interrupt for a second because we're all going to adapt or not survive.
Right.
Because that is the other very real piece of this that I think is contributing not only to a lot of people's fears, but has really motivated people to do what they need to do to stay safe, is because this is not just a pandemic, it's a highly deadly pandemic. So, that's a different experience. When we've had epidemics before, like the measles outbreak in California. So the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic, of course, is the pandemic is the whole world, and epidemic is just in one specific area. It still didn't really motivate a lot of anti-vaxxer parents to get their kids vaccinated with measles because they just didn't feel or fear that this was as dangerous as it really is. But here, I think the message has been really communicated that this is deadly, with some notable exceptions. There's still 8 governors who haven't done anything to shut down their states. There are still people who are going to big protests where they're together.
Don't get me started.
And of course, all the spring breaker kids in Florida. Your kids didn't go to spring break in Florida.
No, I have 3 college kids. None of them went spring breaking anywhere. No. On their own, they had their own choices. I let them make their own choices, but they were sufficiently frightened, which they should be. And are global citizens. They're just good humans. I always say I had kids and I raised them and they're good humans. And now I'm done. You're never really done. But
get back to me in a few years. Let me know how done you think you are.
I know better. They were here for 3 weeks of this, and I ran out of food every afternoon. Crazy.
Yeah, I didn't anticipate. There's so many things I didn't anticipate about being a mother, but the number one thing I did not anticipate is how much time, energy, and money I would spend on parenting related activities once they were graduated from college. I was not prepared for that. And certainly in this pandemic, both of my adult children came home with significant others. Right. So while I was fully prepared for a pandemic for 2, I was not prepared for a pandemic for 6.
Wow, that is a lot. So I had we're empty nesters too. And my son and his girlfriend came, and my daughter and her roommate who's from New Jersey. And then she had another friend from Boston, and none of them, it was spring break, and none of them could go home. They couldn't decide what to do. I was like, just bring your friends here. We'll shelter in place and figure out what's happening, and then we'll make some plans. So yeah, we had a big house full too. And I kind of like my routine and the quiet of a house with just me and my husband. So yeah, everybody made those adjustments as well. And it's been fun to hear from other people how they're handling that and how they're doing, because we are a little bit of creatures of habit. And I love the time with them. Don't get me wrong, because I know I'm not always going to have it. But it is a little different when it's not my norm. Yeah.
Well, and we didn't know how long it was going to be. We didn't know who was going to be sick. We didn't know. There's just so many unknowns that we still have. Let's talk about some of the examples where you've had to really tap into your own personal resilience. And certainly having been a competitive athlete, and I was a varsity swimmer in college, so I certainly know this drill. And the mother of a gymnast, which was very stressful. Thank goodness she switched to soccer. But tell us about the first time you ever recall having had a pretty major disappointment in your life and having to figure out for yourself what resilience was.
Yeah, so I grew up a Navy brat, so I sort of knew that, life doesn't always go as you plan. You don't get to make the plans. It came from other people. But my first big difficulty, and I start chapter 2 with this, I call them my big 5 fails, and I just lay them out in chapter 2 so you can just run through them, because like I said, the book's not about me. But my first big one was I was on the U.S. Gymnastics Team, I moved away from home when I was 13. I put my whole life into like living at the Olympic Training Center and traveling the world, Japan, Hungary, Germany, you know, wearing the USA sweats. You're all in.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't make the team in '84. Only 6 girls get to go to the Olympics.
Yeah, I think most people don't understand that. We've talked to
Yes.
another Olympian about that. So how many girls are on the team, and of those, only 6 get to go?
So back when in the '80s, when I was on the team, there were 12 to 15 that were considered on the U.S. team, sometimes more, that were part of the U.S. team. You were chosen, but the top athletes in the nation were chosen to go represent the United States. And they sent you the big box with all your sweats in it and everything. Said it was really neat. You got a letter. And so you made the U.S. team and you started representing the United States and going around the globe doing that. And then when it came to an Olympic year, they still had an Olympic trials. And those top athletes are all at the trials. That's who you see. Those are your U.S. team members at the trials. And then they do 6. Now it's only 4 this next year. So isn't that crazy?
Well, actually, now the Olympics are postponed a year.
Right.
So, we certainly weren't expecting at least a year. We still don't know what's really going to happen. So tell us your favorite Mary Lou Retton story.
Okay. So anyway, that first big disappointment was that I didn't tell you how I got through it, but I will. So when I was on the U.S. team with Mary Lou, my favorite story, the first year she won the USA Championships, I won Miss Congeniality.
So that was actually a thing.
That was a thing. Oh, I still have the trophy on my shelf. Yes. I don't keep any trophies from gymnastics, but I do have my Miss Congeniality from the USA Championships. So that was a thing.
Didn't have that in swimming.
And the girls all vote on it, for
that's great.
The person on the U.S. team they're very like. So that was neat. But one time I was in Vegas. Mary Lou and I were in Vegas. We were probably 15. We were competing at the Caesars Palace Invitational. And we snuck down to the casino, like one of the little corner areas, and we started playing the slots. You weren't really allowed to do that. We weren't old enough. And we, played for a little bit. No one said anything to us. But then we won. And back then it would go ching, 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 and all the money would fall out. And so then the little security guy came walking over to us, and he had a cup, and he was going to scoop up all our earnings. And that was, and we were like, wait, we won. He's like, but we're too young. We should have been running. So I am ready to run. And Mary Lou's like tucking in her shirt and like pouring the nickels down like she So my first idea is run. And hers like, yeah, they're not taking my money.
Keep the money.
Yeah, her daughter and my son were both at LSU the last 4 years.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah, so we reconnected after all these years because our kids were both at college at the same time.
I love those kinds of stories. So my favorite Mary Lou Retton story is a story she told about her daughters. I was at an event. She had been a speaker for many years on her experiences with stress urinary incontinence, which she developed from a relatively young age. As most people remember, Mary Lou Retton is teeny, and she had 4 children, which wreaks havoc on your body, but particularly on your urinary tract. And she was telling this story about how she never wanted to be a gymnastics mom, but one of her daughters was really into gymnastics, and they were just kind of horsing around on the lawn one day doing roundoffs and back handsprings. And she said, all I said to my 10-year-old daughter was, that's great, honey, but when you're at the top of your roundoff, just put your feet together and point your toes. And her 10-year-old puts her hands on her hips like, only a 10-year-old daughter could do, and says to her mother, what do you know?
So great.
And I've told that story to my daughter many, many times over the years.
I love it.
Especially when I'm giving my own daughter medical advice and she says to me, what do you know?
No, exactly. Well, I didn't really talk about my gymnastics and that part of my life much while the children were growing up. I did, all the trophies were in the attic. All of my stuff was in the attic. I wanted their lives to be about them. Mm-hmm. So it's never been a part of my story. Really, writing the book has brought this all back up. It's been really interesting because I don't usually talk about all the accolades. I've just been being mom and raising kids and working. So when we went down to LSU, and my kids did know that I was on the team with Mary Lou, and they'd heard some stories, but it was never a big deal. But we went to LSU for a football game, and we went to the gymnastics pregame party, and my son was with me with some other people, and she was there, mm-hmm. and she was like, Nina, and we hugged, and he looked at me and goes, holy crap. I was like, Did you think I was making this up? Like, what part of this? Like, why would I lie?
Now,
It
was
was
he a
very funny.
gymnast?
No, he was when he was little.
Okay.
He can still do, he's more than 6 feet tall. He can still do a backflip. I taught him that very young.
Wow.
He's,
So my
um,
daughter is a 25-year-old actress, and she can still do an aerial, which is and an aerial into a split. So that has come up in several productions that she's been in. They stick her, they have her do that and stick the landing, which is
that's
very stressful
fantastic.
on a stage versus on gymnastics mats.
Right. So my son was a baseball player,
Mhm.
and I married a baseball player from LSU. So we have these like super talented athletic kids. My first husband, and so he played baseball. But the reason he kept his backflip all those years is because he was a pitcher and he wanted to get to the pros and do a flip over the line when he went
Mhm.
out to pitch. That was going to be his thing, when he was
Mhm.
young. So he had Tommy John surgery and ended up not playing.
Aw.
He's going to take the MCAT at some point and do other things. I always have said we all go pro in something else.
Well,
So
it's pretty good that when your second choice is being a doctor.
right. Well, there were other ones. There were some real doozies in between that. It was not. It's been an interesting journey for
And
him.
to get back to resilience, I'm just thinking now, hearing you talking about, this various levels of success that you had early in your life because of gymnastics. I wonder if it's easier to be resilient when you already have success in the bank. And what I mean by that is you can draw on that. So you can, or your son can draw on the success he had in, a certain level in gymnastics, a certain level in baseball, and that we can all draw on that. I remember when I was in 5th grade, I got this idea to read all of the biographies in the school library. And before you get very impressed, it was a very small library. And I read them from A to Z. And one of the things that was very clear to me as a 10-year-old was that the one thing every single one of these people had was some large element of adversity in their lives as a young person. And I remember very clearly thinking that I would never be successful because I didn't have anything, really terrible that happened in my life. And then when I was 11, I was actually diagnosed with a long-term medical problem that still causes me medical problems. And my first thought was, yay, now I can be successful because now I have my adversity.
Talk about that in the book. It's actually not till the end. I don't start with that because people, when you meet them in the middle of some big pivot in their life, they're not ready to hear that. But in the very final chapter, I say, welcome to the team. Like, you are now like part of the group that goes through this. And in chapter 10, I have a list of other people who have gone through big stuff. Oprah Winfrey, born in poverty, had a baby at, molested, had a baby at 14, the baby died. Like, you see her, she had to live with her uncle, and then she ends up getting her first dream job. She gets to college, and then she gets this dream job. She gets fired because she's too emotional. I mean, Oprah, like, how did she become Oprah? So, and I talk about lots of other folks too, Lady Gaga and different people who've had some real, challenges in their life. We're not born resilient. We don't come out either resilient or not resilient. I talk about how you handle all the little stuff. It's like a muscle you build. Resilience is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger you get. So you do find people who have been through a lot who are very resilient and will just manage through and power through. And I think they're responsible for bringing the other people along who maybe have had more charmed lives and they haven't had to learn to be so resilient. And that's what this book is.
Although, like the biographies that I read in 5th grade, the only parts of somebody else's story that are the parts that they've chosen to share. So
Right.
one of the parts that you've chosen to share was the abject despair and even suicidal thoughts you felt after being in this tragic car accident, which I want to hear about. But obviously, we don't hear those parts of many people's stories, which is why we seem to always be shocked when a beloved celebrity like a Robin Williams does take his own life. Or just recently, just a couple of days ago, Dr. Breen, who is the head of the emergency room at Columbia Presbyterian, took her own life. When the stress of being an ER doctor in this horrible situation just became overwhelming. But so tell us about what happened with this accident and how you managed to get through this. It doesn't seem like all the resilience in the world could kind of push you through something like this.
Yeah. So it's been 15 years. It's never an easy story to tell, but it has been 15 years. And as you said, there's a happy ending to it. So it's
It makes it
easier
much
to
easier.
because of that. So I was a, we'll say popular news anchor, big fish, little pond, but very popular in the community where I've been doing news for years. And my co-anchor and I were close, like most co-anchors are when you work with somebody that closely every day for 3 shows a day for years. I took the afternoon off to go pick up my son from the school bus, like the normal moms did. It was a big deal for me. And I went, and the school bus actually came around to the corner house down the street on the other side of the neighborhood, the corner house, which happened to be my co-anchor's house. He lived in the same community. So he and his wife lived like down around the street. In the corner house. So you've been to a bus stop. I'm assuming a lot of people have. You can hear the bus coming around the corner, and the kids, and it's elementary school, and the kids all pile off, and there's a lot of commotion and stuff. So it was one of those days, beautiful.
Although right now everybody who lives in a city is saying, "What's this driving to the bus stop thing?"
Yeah,
and every suburban mom is saying, "Yeah, been there, done that."
Yeah. Well, and because we had errands to run and things to do. So I took the car down to the bus stop, because I was going to scoop him up and go get a bunch of stuff done on this day that we had to get to that together because it was special. I was taking the day off. So, yeah, so I'm there and the kids all get off like they do. And there's, people, lots of moms with kids and, with little kids and big kids. And my son got off was the 3rd grade. Anyway, so in the commotion of all of that, my co-anchor and he and his wife had an 11-month-old. And so in the commotion of all of that, we jump in the car, how's your day? Here's your juice box sort of thing. And I go to leave, and none of us had noticed that the 11-month-old baby had crawled onto the driveway.
Oh my God.
And I backed up. So in that moment, I went from, world-class athlete and very beloved news anchor to the woman who ran over a baby. And in your head, what happens, like you don't see any path forward. So his skull was crushed, and it was lots of months of doctor's appointments, and he was in the hospital for a long time. There were prayer vigils all over town. It was really a miracle in so many ways that he lived. In between the news trucks on my lawn and the prayer vigils and all of these things, these doctors and physicians, a lot of things had to happen just right. But he lived, he's 15, he's on the high school basketball team, he's cute as a button, and he's a good kid, he makes good grades. So he had a full recovery. But for a while there, none of us knew if he would. And I was in a really dark place, and there was no way I could make this part of me. How do you do that? Like, I could never see happy on the other side of it ever. And so I went through a really dark phase there. And I talk about that in the book. And one of the things, as you mentioned, you got to get help. It's not easy to ask for help. I'm very independent. So you have to get help if you're in that situation. I was lucky I had a fabulous husband who knew I needed a man with a psych degree. So my second husband is there. So he was very helpful. But we found help, and I had good people around me, and the whole community was very supportive to all of us. We went back on the air together for a year. We just led with love, and we all got through it together in our own ways. But it was a journey. And even that whole first year, I talk about it in the book, just the constant memories and the way in which you beat yourself up, and the way in which you have to accept the word accident, and you have to accept that life will never be the same, but there can be many chapters ahead. But I was ready to call it the last chapter in several instances. And even when I went back on the air, there were days when I would stand, and I talk about this in the book, with a razor in my hand and think, if I just slice up my face, then I won't be pretty and they won't want me back on the air. Like, what can I do not to have to keep being me, anything but. So
you had these thoughts. Did you ever act on any of the thoughts that you had?
I didn't. I would walk, and I would want to step out into traffic. I would want to, I used to think I could just, like, I understand cutters, because I can understand, like, I don't think I would have felt anything after a while. You're so numb after so many days of crying and so much pain and so much emotion. Your body does shut down, and you have this weird numbness. I talk about that in the book, and there's actually a little shadowed part, like if you really want to know the science around it, here it is. But if you don't want to know the science, let me get you through this. But you do have this weird numbness that happens when something so overwhelmingly sad and the grief and totally out of your control, you can't figure out how to go forward. And I had 3 small children, so my kids were tiny, and I was lucky I had other people to take them and to help with them. But part of it is asking for help. And I had a good therapist who's still a dear friend. And I went to several. The one said to me, and I talk about this in the book, like, okay, let's, shut your eyes, let's find a happy place. I was like, I just ran over my friend's baby. There's no happy place in here. And I used some other language that I won't share right now. And I got up and walked out.
We like, have used that language, by the way, on this podcast.
I was like, yeah, I there's no happy place in here. And if you don't get that, you're not my person. Mm-hmm. But I did find someone who gave me things. I needed to do things. I needed things to work on. I couldn't just sit back and be quiet and try to get my head in the right place. I needed to say
concrete strategies.
Yes, I wanted. Let's find a sentence so you can step out into the public and have something that, like, when people say, how are you? There's no good answer. Mm-hmm. If you're doing well, then you're not dealing with it. If you're not doing well, then you're not dealing with it. What do you say? So let's craft a sentence. You can go back out. And I talk about that in the book too. How do you craft that sentence? What does that look like for you and your situation? So there was a lot of learning. And, I didn't realize all the things I had done until 15 years later when I sat down to write this, and I revisited old journals. I journaled a lot through it. I've always journaled, but I revisited old journals and I went through those emotions again. It was very cathartic in that situation to kind of go through that again. But it also was really empowering because I did get through it. At the time you just get through day by day. But when you look back on it, you realize, oh, so this is why. Fast forward 7 years later, I'm standing in New York at the NASDAQ and we're ringing the bell during an IPO. And I think, how did I get here? But all of that resilience, when other people were crumbling and we all too hard in business, to do something that hard, I was like, come on, we got this. We're fine.
Right.
Like,
this is nothing. This is not life and death. I felt that way when I left clinical medicine. And I went into business after being in clinical medicine as an OBGYN. And there was no problem in business that fazed me because it was minimal compared to the problems that we faced in medicine. But you said something interesting earlier about people aren't born with resilience. And when I reflect on my experiences as an OBGYN, having delivered lots of babies, especially premature babies, I have to kind of take some issue with that, just on my experiences of seeing these babies in the intensive care nursery. And the nurses would have a thing where they would say, oh, this one's a fighter. We can tell this one, is a fighter. And all the ones where the nurses would say this one is a fighter had just much better odds. And this is not a scientific study. This was just my observations. And I've heard lots of my colleagues say the same thing, is that even babies that were a pound, at birth and tremendously premature. And in our patient population, we had a lot of drug addicted babies and babies born with horrific medical conditions. You could see that some of them just seemed to lie there listlessly. And those babies did not have what it took for this fight. And then other babies just seemed to be fighting whatever we did to them. And I'm wondering about, this baby that you ran over, if he had some intrinsic resilience or if he developed it for his life during that experience.
I've heard the science is, I always say we're not born with it, but there's been some people who will argue and have tried to see what exactly we're born with. It does innately become part of our DNA or our genetics, how we come out. And so I guess you could say on some of those scientific studies that there's some level of resilience, like, you come from a line of tough people, whatever that means, But I do think that, and I for most of the research I've done and the way that you look at this, and they even teach resilience, cognitive behavioral therapy before they send soldiers off to war now, because they know that this is a piece that they need to improve. So it is a learned behavior through life. That baby boy was the youngest of 3 at 11 months, so he'd already been,
he'd already been beat up.
was the youngest of 3 boys at the time.
Well, there is
So,
a lot
yeah.
of research on birth order and the impact that can have on people's, development and their developmental stages, and certainly their resilience and their character. But now I can hear everybody listening to this podcast screaming at me saying, okay, Danica, enough of the chit chat. We want the strategies. We want the meat and potatoes here. So give people like your top 5 tips for how they can use these principles that you talk about in the book, This Is Not the End, to apply specifically to, say, this pandemic crisis, because this is something we all share. Everybody has their own crises going on, whether it's going through relationship problems or job problems or financial problems or health problems, whatever it is. But this is the one thing we all share. So give us your top 5 tips and let's talk about how they apply to this crisis.
Okay. The first is it's how you handle the this is. It's called This Is Not the End because your this is different from my this. Just like you said, everybody's got their own stuff they're going through. So it's called This Is Not the End. And we look at this word this throughout it, whatever this is you're dealing with. So how you handle the this is in your life is directly related to how successful or how well you will come out on the other side. And that's not just the big things like a diagnosis or a disease or a trauma or a divorce or losing your job. Those are the big all caps this is. Then I call them the capital T this is, THIS with just a capital T. And those are you have a bad quarter, or you break your leg in the middle of your busiest part of your career or something like that you're going to have to change things. It's definitely sidetracking you for more than just a few days. And then there's the everyday this is, the traffic, or you spill coffee into your computer, or your kids' school calls in the middle of your big meeting or something. How you handle the little things builds to how you handle the big things. So one of the things I talk about is it's not just the one thing you're dealing with. It's a collective of all the little stuff. So in your mind, where does this fit in the book of your life? And that's the next piece. It's perspective. So in this book of your life, is whatever you're dealing with, is this a whole new chapter? You're taking your main character, you in a whole new direction? Or is this maybe a few pages? If your kid's school calls in the middle of your big meeting, it's not even making your book. Like, why are you spending so much emotional energy and time on it? That's not making it into your book. Manage it, deal with it, move on. So that's what I mean by the dealing with the this is. So in the book of your life, what does that look like? And use that as perspective. So even this is one chapter that we're all going through. This is not our whole books. We're all going to have one, in many cases, really crappy chapter. If you've lost a job, other people are just going to have a really interesting, weird chapter during this, but we're all going to have this chapter. This is just one chapter. It is not your whole book. So that perspective thinking is another piece. Figuring out where to put this in your head has a lot to do with the language that you're using right now. And the language in your head is the language that comes out of your mouth. And that's the language that comes back to you. So if you're saying I'm stuck at home instead of I'm safe at home, very different language. If you lose your job and somebody from the office calls you to check on you, because usually somebody like draws straws and somebody's going to call you and check on you and go, oh, check on Nina, see how she's doing. So if you answer the phone and you go, oh, I didn't see this coming, and so-and-so doesn't work as hard as me, and how come so-and-so's there, and I'm just so mad, and I gave them 10 years of my life, and then that's what you say, and you hang up, and then that person says to the office, because they were the ones who had to call you, oh, how's she handling it? Well, she's mad, she didn't see it coming, she says so-and-so should have gone first. That becomes your story. In the same situation, you pick up the phone and you go, I didn't see it coming. Wow, 10 years. It was a good 10 years. I'm looking. If anybody needs, let everybody know that I'm looking because I'm going to need to find something, and tell everybody good luck. You put down the phone. Then they say, how's she doing? That's now your story. She's handling it well. She's looking for something. If anybody knows of anybody hiring, that becomes your story. Really important while we're all in the middle of this, because a lot of people are getting furloughed and let go. It's really hard to hire back the people who are jerks. Don't be an ass, people. Like, if you want to get hired back or you want to find another job, you need to set yourself up for success. So your future self needs you to keep it in check and say things that become part of your story when you are let go or something bad happens. You need to create an opportunity for yourself in the future. The people who blow up and lose it and then make really bad choices and just drink and get angry, and they're really hard to rehire, but if you are expanding your network and reaching out to more people and keeping your skills up to date, maybe learning a new skill, getting ready for whatever opportunity is out there, because people will hire again. There will be new opportunities.
It's also really hard to
But
like people like that. But the other thing
Right.
that I'm thinking as you're saying this, about this issue of transformative language and the word choices that we use and the mood choices and the emotion we allow to be expressed behind the words also influences our children. Again, whatever age they are, even when they're grown, I find, back to my earlier point about how much time I'm spending on parenting things now that my children are, college graduates, is I feel like it's even more important for me to model as a parent solution-based behavior and positive behaviors and positive thinking and ways of thinking about situations or discussing new situations, whether it's the pandemic or politics or health crises or misinformation, any of those kinds of issues.
Yeah, it is this language becomes your story. It's part of this writing your story, and the language you use, your children will use in their book. And shocker for all of the moms that are listening right now, you're not writing your children's books. They're writing their own stories. You think you are, but
and
you're
you're
not.
a main character.
You are a main character, yeah, but you're not the main character. They're each writing their own stories, and you can give them language and give them situational stuff to help them get through this and manage their own story, but you're not writing their story.
That's awesome.
And then the final one is this idea around what's in the next chapter. And so one of the things we do, especially as women who are moms and work and do all of these things, and we're very aware of trying to keep everybody happy and get everybody fed and keep the world moving when things are uncertain. We're kind of the glue around a lot of homes, even though we blow off the handle or do whatever we do. But we are the go-to sort of in these situations. One of the key things for everyone to remember is you have all of these chapters ahead, no matter what situation you're in, if you're at home by yourself, isolated, or whatever. This is an opportunity. This has given us all a moment of pause. This is an opportunity for everyone on the globe, everyone to think about what's going to be in their chapters ahead. Mm-hmm. And so I highly encourage in the book, and I highly encourage folks now to think about things you like. What do you like to eat? What do you like to do? Where do you like to go? Like, spend some time thinking about that. Because when we're so busy and we're being moms, we don't do that often. We don't spend much time on us. I remember at one point being asked to do that, and I couldn't even make a list of things I liked. Why? So it was hard to think of things that I like to do in places. I mean, you just forget who you are. So make a list of things you like, and importantly, make a list of things you don't like. People you don't like, things you don't like, food you don't like, places you don't like. Just like the people you do like, you need both of those. And then as you're planning out your chapters ahead, while we're in this pause, make sure you plan out more of the things you like in the future, and maybe try to weed out some of the things you don't, whether it's a friend that's poisonous or you've seen, because this true colors are coming out during this for everyone. So if you have a friend who was already really negative and poisonous, they're super negative and poisonous now. If you're a micromanager as a boss, they're in the worst place right now because you can't do that. So you will know when you make these lists of the things, and I highly recommend you look at your future. You need to plan the things that you want in your future and add them to it. My example I use in the book is I live 3 miles from the beach, and there were months that would go by and I would never go to the beach, but it was one of my top things when I had to make my list of things that I loved. I loved going to the beach, and I loved cycling. I hadn't cycled in years, and I went to the beach maybe once every few months. I was like, why don't I do that more? So in my future state, I put it on there. I'm going to go to the beach. I'm going to cycle. I'm going to eat more sushi because I love it. The things that I eat, even simple things as food that we like. Plan those into your next chapter when we all get back out in the world again, and make sure that that becomes part of your story. People have said to me, oh, you're so lucky because I cycle. I do distance cycling. And they're like, you're so lucky that you do that and you find time for it. It's like, no, I decided I liked it. I spent money on a bicycle. I allocated time to do it. I just made it part of my story. There's not luck involved. That was because I wanted something and I made plans for it. So all of us have that, even when you're busy. I always say, Oprah Winfrey and Barack Obama, they all have the same 24 hours in the day. We can't be more busy than they are. So,
yeah, I actually saw a sign outside a gym that says Beyonce has the same 24 hours in her day as you do. So why does she look like that and you look like you?
Well, that's because I'm not eating well during this.
Well, and eating is one of those things that people have to focus on and say, okay, how do I get control of this? How do I regroup? How do I say what I want and make it something you want as opposed to what you have to do or something that's being imposed on you. You know, I like this concept of thinking of this sequestration as a timeout or a pause where we hit the pause button, because I think many of us have felt in our past that we've just gotten so busy that wouldn't it be nice if we could just take time off? But then we don't want everybody else to be getting ahead. So this is, if everybody
a great equalizer.
In timeout to a certain degree. I want to be very cognizant of the fact that there are some people who are working harder than ever right now while the rest of us are home.
And homeschooling and doing it all.
Well, but also certainly healthcare workers, grocery store workers, people who work in warehouses and postmen and delivery people, and even my plumber, had to come because I had a plumbing emergency. And I asked him, what percent, are you working as hard as ever? And he says, plumbing emergencies don't care that there's a pandemic.
Exactly.
I'm as busy as ever. So there's lots and lots and lots of people, first responders who are working harder than they've ever before. And even, people I know who are dermatologists or pathologists are now, or psychiatrists who are working in the emergency room as though they were first-year residents. So we could talk about this all day. I hate to let you go. Good luck with the book. Please tell everybody where they can get it.
It is called This Is Not the End, Strategies to Get You Through the Worst Chapters of Your Life. And you can get it anywhere where you buy books, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Indigo, Amazon. You can order it and have it delivered to your door. Or if you want to grab it quickly, you can download it through Amazon or any of those same places onto your Nook or your Kindle or your Apple Reader. So the ebook is out there. And
you
all
can
of
give it to all your adult children who need it as much as you do. So before I let you go, please quickly tell us what everybody is dying to know, your most interesting, memorable, unique experience you ever had in a ladies' room.
This was a tough one for me because I was trying to decide in all of the interesting things in my life, like how young or how old I was. I think it was at a comedy club downtown. So I love comedy. I love improv. I'm big into improv. And so there was this person who'd had quite a bit to drink. And so there's only 2 stalls. And so there's so many women during the intermission and everybody was waiting. And this one woman was in this one stall. And so the whole bathroom while we waited, like she was saying weird, she was drunk and she was taking forever and she couldn't get her dress off or on or something. Everybody made her like the comedy, like we all did improv about this poor woman who was not, she was really drunk and stuck in her dress. It was pretty funny. But all of the women, it was like we ganged up, I guess it was kind of mean, but it was hilarious. And we just kept going and just riffing on this, like everything and then anyone who came into the bathroom, it just was, all of us thought we were a stand-up comic. And I think it was probably the most fun I've ever had in a ladies' room. And that is the best way to deal with any kind of adversity or, unlucky little situation, is to just make fun of it and make jokes about it and have a good laugh, because laughter is, of course, the best medicine. And thank you so much for joining us. Good luck with the book. I can't wait to finish it. I'm about halfway through the ebook, and I really appreciate you making that available, and I know everybody else will as well. Take care and stay safe. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. And you stay safe as well.
My pleasure.
That's all we have time for today. But let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook at Dr. Donica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.